we decided to create our own CMS, which was API first. We've been using traditional CMSs for years, and all of the CMSs we were using were open source. So it was just a no-brainer for us to build an open source Headless CMS. I truly believe that not only the CMS industry, but the entire website creation industry is completely shifting to the JAMstack. And I think it's only the beginning of the journey.
Hey, this is Brian, and you're listening to JAMstack Radio, a bi-weekly series where we discuss the JAMstack, a new way of building websites and apps that are fast, secure, and simple to work with. JAMstack Radio is brought to you by Heavybit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at JAMstack Radio. Welcome to another installment of JAMstack Radio. On the line, we got Pierre.
Hi, Brian. Thanks a lot for welcoming me today.
I understand that Strapi is basically open source, but can you expound on the history of it and how we got to there?
Yeah, sure. So the name Strapi comes from Bootstrap your API. So at Strapi, everything is about API. So Strapi is a headless CMS, but the main things about Strapi is that Strapi is completely open source. So you can host it on your own servers and you can customize it according to your needs. So we actually started Strapi in 2015. We were students and we worked as freelance developers on our side time. And we did a lot of projects, a lot of websites using traditional CMSs. But when we had to do a mobile application or a website using modern technologies, so it was Angular at the time and React was just a brand new framework. And, all of these technologies were not compatible with the traditional CMSs. So we were stuck because we couldn't find a great fit between these technologies. So we decided to create our own CMS, which was API first. So we weren't talking about Headless CMS at the time, but we just created it because we needed something like this. And at the end of 2015, we just say, we are probably not the only one having this need, so we decided to publish it on GitHub. And we could have built a SaaS, but for us, we've been using traditional CMSs for years, and all of the CMSs we were using were open source. So it was just a no-brainer for us to build an open source Headless CMS. So that's why we decided to publish it on GitHub. And we started having some users. And so it was extremely exciting because we were still students. And at the end of university, we decided to create a company behind the open source project and to switch full-time on the project. And that was the real beginning of the story.
Excellent. So you had mentioned about Angular and the whole sort of ecosystem around JavaScript at that time. Because I remember that time. That's actually when I first started really doing JavaScript pretty seriously as far as an engineer. Before I used to be a copy and paster and drop in jQuery snippets and stuff like that. And I did work at a company that I worked on Angular full time, but I did not know what I was doing. It was more of copy and pasting from Stack Overflow and good projects that were out there. So I'm curious of you'd mentioned that you started this when you were a student and you were looking to solve problems getting projects up and running. So how was the adoption at this point? Did you see once you open source it, did people just start jumping to it, or how did you actually get people to know about Strapi?
Yeah, so we started a few posts on Reddit to make the project a little bit more famous than it was. And so we had feedback about the product, about the need. So it was extremely helpful. It was absolutely not the traction we have today, but still, it was really important to get some feedback. And then we started publishing tutorials, and it's really boosted our adoption. So we really started at the beginning of 2017 to publish lots of tutorials, and it's still our number one growth strategy. So we publish a lot of tutorials. So for example, how to build a blog with Strapi and Next.js, for example. So we do a lot of tutorials with complementary technologies.
Yeah, and it could not be understated enough that introductory into new projects or new technologies, hands down, tutorials and actual explanation outside of just standard documentation it's how I actually learn things. If I can't find an example of how to get something accomplished, and like the way I want to get it accomplished, I can sort of pick and piece stuff through the documentation, but like being able to see how to do something either the X way or the Y way or the Z way, like that's definitely super helpful. So I'm curious of what are different things that people use Strapi to build with today?
Yeah, it's extremely important to bring the developer to what is this tool to the wow moment. And as a developer, it's really important to be able to see the value of the project very quickly. And so regarding the projects which are made with Strapi, so we have some main use cases. So the first one is a corporate website. We also have a lot of editorial websites and a lot of e-commerce websites. But we also have some mobile applications projects and even IoT. So for example, the MIT decided to create a connected object which is in the street. And in case of an earthquake, the connected object is going to spread a message in the street. And this message comes from Strapi. So we have lots of use cases, and it's really impressive how the headless approach brings new possibilities to projects.
Yeah, so like the kind of content that I like to write and the help other developers, it's really around how many seconds does it take to get to actually using a product or using this feature or using this like library. So if I can get someone unblocked or get myself unblocked, if I get stuck again, like Google and find my blog post again, like I want to be the quickest as possible. So like I tend to always build templates and like starter projects to get myself unblocked rather quickly when I use the product again. So it sounds like Strapi's doing that pretty well, where you have those examples where I can just like either clone or copy and paste and then like at least get myself with something usable as opposed to spending half a day working on something and trying to make it like bend it to my will. Yeah, so I'm super appreciative. I'm looking at the documentation now and some of the links as well. So and super impressed too to see a couple big names as well who are using Strapi. We talked about the open source side, but I'm also curious around the actual product side and like that transition and how that sort of worked getting there, but also how it works today.
Yeah, so lots of companies are using Strapi. So regarding the onboarding, we really try to focus on this because, the JAMstack brings a lot of advantages, but it also brings a lot of complexity if you compare to something like WordPress, because you have to build the own thing. You have to build the front end. You have to connect to the CMS, to configure the CMS. So it's a lot of work. And because Strapi is open source, you also have to install Node, and to configure your server or your computer. So we really try to focus on the onboarding part. And typically this year we decided to publish some starters, so that way you can get up and running with the front end and the Strapi project. So this is something we really try to focus on. And I'm sure it's something which is just going to be drastically improved in the next few years in the JAMstack ecosystem, because now you have lots of different components. So you have the front end, you have the hosting for the front end, you have maybe the e-commerce platform, you have the CMS. And I think all of these different components have different values. So I'm not sure it's going to be compiled in only one solution, but the more integration there are in between all of the solutions, the better it will be for our users.
Yeah, so I'm curious. I mean, I perhaps you have like a biased opinion on this because you're running a company / project that's powering APIs and content management. But I'm curious of like the outlook of that actual piece that you were talking about, where we have the different components and they're all different areas. So in my mind, I like having separation because then I can focus on the front end and do that really well at that time, and then focus on the back end and do that really well at that time. So I'm curious, like the adoption for Strapi, like you have to, IBM's a big name, like they've been around for years, even before tech was tech. But I'm curious of like adoption conversations, like are you having these positive conversations? Are people still sort of on the fence on using something like a Strapi to actually power some of their content?
Yeah, so they decide to use Strapi most of the time because they want to build a mobile application so it's not compatible with our traditional CMSs, or because they want to use a modern technology for their front end, typically such as React or Vue.js. And when they have to make this choice, there are a bunch of different options, but they really want to have something which is customizable, self-hosted, flexible. So that's why some of them decide to use Strapi. Yeah, in general, I also think it's important to keep things separated. But I also think it's our responsibility to make the usage from the front end easier. So just to give an example, we decided to develop a plugin for Gatsby. So as you probably know, Gatsby is based on a data source system. And to get data from a specific source, you have to develop a Gatsby source plugin. So that's what we decided to do with Gatsby. And it definitely helps our users to make the bridge between the front end and the CMS. And this is also true for all of the potential complementary integrations. And I think integration is kind of the new plugin. So, in traditional CMSs, you had lots of plugins, and I think most of the plugins now for headless CMSs will be about making integrations. So, for example, if you want to manage your content in a headless CMS and you want to synchronize it in Algolia, you don't want to build your own synchronization software. Yeah. You want to install a plugin or enable an integration. And I think it's definitely the future of headless CMSs. It's really about integrating your solution to as many software as possible. And this is something we really want to focus on at Strapi, because if you take a look at WordPress, for example, what made the success of WordPress is not WordPress itself, but it really the ecosystem of plugins around it. So we already have a plugin system in Strapi. We are going to drastically improve it to offer to anyone the possibility to develop their own plugin, to share it on the marketplace, and to download plugins from other people. So I think that's a very good way to create bridges with solutions in the JAMstack ecosystem. And at the same time, it keeps things separated. We don't intend to become a search engine. Algolia or Elastic will be better than us at this for sure.
Yes,
but I think it's our own responsibility to create these integrations with all of the software.
Yeah, and it's very observing to see that you have an integration platform or ecosystem. Gatsby has a plugin ecosystem. And then we have like Algolia has them, like Netlify just announced theirs as well. They're unveiled a bunch of new plugins for their ecosystem. So like being able to integrate different pieces and have those bridges between things like Strapi or like an Algolia, it's definitely helping. And it's definitely helping like further the sort of adoption of this, I guess, the separation of these concerns. So yeah, I'm a fan of these integration platforms, and I'm curious of how the Strapi integrations, how they work or will work. Are these just open source libraries on NPM that we just plug in? Or is there a template? Is there SDK that I should be looking out for?
Yeah, so most of the integrations are published on NPM. They are available on GitHub. So we maintain a few integrations, but also the community developed a lot of them. So just to give an example for the most famous use case we have at the moment. So in a headless CMS, you can upload files. And because Strapi is open source, by default, the files are uploaded on the server which is running Strapi. But it doesn't scale really well because you will definitely prefer to upload your assets on a storage provider such as Cloudinary or AWS S3. So we did this integration system, and currently we do maintain the integrations with AWS S3 and Cloudinary. But we have lots of contributions for the community on these plugins. And also, some people decided to publish plugins, for example, to upload on Azure. So that's just an example.
Yeah, so I'm curious, like when I think of like headless CMSs, and like the listeners are they should be familiar with headless CMSs if you listen to most of the episodes of JAMstack Radio. Like we've had Contentful on and a few others too as well. So I'm curious of how you sort of align, compete, compare to some of the other ones that are out there. Contentful being the one that I have most familiarity with. I know Sanity is a little more bells and whistles out of the box. So Sanity is like more of like your Webflow where you have all the pieces directly in the UI and you're just using an SDK to then present that in React. But then like with Contentful, it does have a little extra bells and whistles with their SDK, but also still similar where you spend most of your time on the UI. So with Strapi, how do you compare to sort of that experience?
Yeah, so the main difference is that only Strapi is completely open source. And that's a very big advantage because most of the big companies still want to host their CMS on their server. And that's mostly for data privacy reasons. And it's extremely important. So, for example, IBM, the NASA, all of these companies are using Strapi because they want to host on their servers. It's extremely important for them. And the thing is really about the flexibility. So Strapi is completely customizable thanks to the plugin system, but you can also, for example, override any API endpoint. You can update anything in the admin panel. So you are completely free. You are not locked in a specific system. And also the content structure in Strapi is extremely flexible because if you are building, for example, a corporate website and you are building the home page, and on the home page you have a tagline, and then you have a list of testimonials, and then you have a description and then a slider, you can land with a very complex data structure. And this is something we really focused on with Strapi. And for example, we introduced the concept of components in the CMS, which means you can create a slider component and you will have the possibility to reuse this component across different content types. And we also introduced the dynamic zone concept, which means you can create a new page and actually define the structure on the fly. So, when you create a page, it doesn't necessarily have the same structure as another one, but thanks to the dynamic zones, you can really create the content on the fly, and it gives you lots of flexibility.
Oh, that's excellent. And I'm curious too on that I guess thought process of being open source. So I think is actually truly powerful too, as well, that having me being able to see what Strapi is all about by just looking at GitHub is really awesome. I'm curious of how licensing works, and you do have a paid version, which I believe is the hosted version. How does that also compare to the open source? Is the paid version also the open source version?
So Strapi is completely free under the MIT license. And at the moment, we don't have any business model, but we are going to introduce the first paid features this year through an enterprise edition. And this enterprise edition will be an extension of the community edition. And it will include enterprise features such as role-based access control or single sign-on. And so it is still self-hosted. So we won't host this version at the beginning. And that's why it is only our first business model. But in the next few years, we will also introduce a hosted version of Strapi to make the onboarding and the infrastructure management extremely easy for our users. So it's not a focus at the moment. We have lots of competitors doing this very well, but it's definitely something we plan to do in the future.
Excellent. Yeah, it's good to know. Yes, for some reason I thought I saw there was a paid version, but maybe I was looking at another.
Actually, we already have an enterprise page on our website.
Okay.
Because we have lots of requests for all of these features.
Gotcha.
And we start selling it, even if the first feature is still in their development. But it would be probably available or in July or August this year.
Okay, excellent. Oh, even putting a date on it too as well. But yeah, so I guess I wasn't mistaken. But I'm curious, between the community edition and I guess the future enterprise edition, I'm sure you have employees, and maybe you're still Strapi, I guess, at the moment. But I'm curious of how much you get as far as open source contribution versus people who are funded by Strapi to work on it.
Yeah, so we have more than 400 contributors who contributed from the beginning of the project. And I would say that in every release, we have between 25% and 50% of pull requests from our users. To be honest, most of the code is, if you take the number of lines of code, it's obviously mostly from the core team. But yeah, we really have a lot of contribution, and this is something we really want to do more. So we just hired a product manager in July, and his role will be to kind of enable the pull request from the community. So this is something we really want to embrace, and we also want to anticipate all of the design specs. So anyone in the community can contribute on very important feature. So that's something we really want to do more.
Excellent. This is pretty enlightening. I've been working on a couple projects where I've sort of not really addressed the idea of having an API or even a database or powering the project or other things. And I tend to try to use the path of least contention when approaching to solve problems, because I tend to not want to have something that's being longstanding and dependent on me updating it. So like, if I can get started with an API rather quickly, I'm a big fan. And if I can get started with an API rather quickly that I know 400 or 500 contributors, if there are that many people who have eyes on something, I have way more confidence in that if I choose a solution, that at least it will continue to move forward even without me paying attention, which I love paying attention to open source. I love contributing back, but there's always some projects where they just sort of sit on the sidelines for a bit.
Yeah, and the project just reached 25,000 stars on GitHub.
Nice.
So you're definitely not alone. The project is used in production. It was still in beta until last month, but we just released this stable version, so you can use it with confidence. And it shouldn't cost you a lot because you can host it just for free on Heroku, for example.
Yep.
So yeah, feel free to give it a try.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, you're about to get 25,001 stars because I'm about to hit the start button on the project. But with that being said, I appreciate you coming on and chatting about Strapi and talking about the open source story as well. Is there anything else you want to add before we transition to picks?
Yeah. So just maybe with the JAMstack author, I truly believe that not only the CMS industry, but the entire website creation industry is completely shifting to the JAMstack. And I think it's only the beginning of the journey. There is still a lot of complexity in the stack now, but I'm sure it's going to be really improved in the next few years.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Super excited. So with that being said, I'm going to transition us to the picks. These are jam picks, things that we're jamming on per se. It could be movie, food, technology, could be a library you just used. So I'm going to go first, if you don't mind, and share my picks. My first pick is actually the Marshall Project. So in the US, we've got some systematic issues. And like, if you're following the news at all in the last 6 months, like in the US, it's been kind of crazy. But I wanted to highlight a non-political focused charitable organization, basically is what I'm getting at. And it's called the Marshall Project. And they're focused around actually getting technology into prisons and actually teaching them for the better. So you're able to walk away with skills. They're nonpartisan, non-political. They're just really focused on education. So I'm a big fan of all those three things. And so I highly recommend, if you have some time, check out the marshallproject.org and see if it's something that you want to help support as well. And then my second pick, not as a deep pick, but it's going to be OneGraph, which is a platform for co-locating all your third-party GraphQL APIs. So we have like Spotify, GitHub, et cetera. You can put it all in one bucket and just authenticate in the OneGraph. And I've been using it to actually power one of my side projects, which is open source, which I literally just mentioned last episode as well. But it's actually been super useful because I just recently adopted a second API, which is Netlify's API. As part of OneGraph. Actually, it's a third. Twitch is another one that I've been using. So I'm actually starting to see the power of actually using something like OneGraph to be able to co-locate some of that data that I don't own. Well, I own the data because it's my accounts, but I don't want to spend the time putting together all this entire API and GraphQL endpoints to make sure all my data is in the right place for my application. So big fan. Also, episode 39 they were on, so take a listen to that as well. So Pierre, do you have any picks?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I really believe in OneGraph. I think they're doing a very good job at merging all of the different GraphQL APIs. And that's probably part of the future of JAMstack, to be able to request the content from only one single endpoint. And so regarding the pick, I think the past few months have been really crazy. And what is happening also in the US now is very impressive. And I think we really have to learn from what happened in the past to build a better future.
Yeah, I could not agree more. And I would also just echo that too as well. Like if you are on Twitter and you happen to follow maybe only React developers or maybe only Angular developers, and this maybe this analogy is not apt or very consistent, but you should follow people who are less like you because that helps grow. And I think things like Strapi is a good example of that, where we could take a solution of maybe a problem that it's already been solved, but the fact that you're still solving the problem is this testament that, tech is never finished. Like we're never feature complete and the world is never feature complete. So I appreciate you saying that. And I appreciate you coming on, talking about Strapi and talking about the JAMstack, and best of luck with the project, and listeners, keep spreading the jam. That's all the time we have for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at JAMstack Radio. To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library. It's packed with amazing talks on sales, marketing, product, and general management from founders of developer tools companies and other industry leaders.